you're going to do anything new or innovative, you have to be willing to be misunderstood. And if you can't tolerate that, then for God's sake, don't do anything new or innovative.
You just heard Jeff Bezos say the price of doing anything truly new is being misunderstood. Now, we're going to unpack the inventor mindset behind that and the simple lever that turns big ideas into real-world breakthroughs. Most people wait for permission to call themselves an inventor. Listen for what he does instead. He treats inventing as an identity, and identities drive behavior when motivation fades.
It's, in my case, I think of myself as an inventor. That's what I am. And I wake up every day and I follow my curiosity and I explore, and I really am an inventor. I'm very good at that. I'm a very good lateral thinker, and I love problems, and I love a whiteboard, and I love having a team of other smart people, and we work together and we find unusual solutions to things. And that's how I think of myself. So like if I could somehow have a Forbes list of inventors, and if I could climb my way to the top of that inventor list, that's what would make me, then I'd be understood, or at least in part.
Now, zoom out. Invention isn't just a personal flex. Done right, it creates value for everyone. Pay attention to how he defines better in a way you can apply to your own work.
It means inventing a better way.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And when you invent a better way, you make the whole world richer. So, whatever it was, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, somebody invented the plow. Mm-hmm. And when they invented the plow, they made the whole world richer because they made farming less expensive. And so it is a big deal to invent better ways. That's how the world gets richer.
Here's the part that separates dreamers from builders. You don't get innovation by thinking harder. You get it by running more experiments. Listen for the brutally simple math in this next clip.
To be innovative, you have to experiment. If you want to have more invention, you need to do more experiments per week, per month, per year, per decade. It's that simple. You cannot invent without experimenting. And here's the other thing about experiments, lots of them fail. If you know it's going to work in advance, it is not an experiment.
If you're scared of wasting time on the wrong idea, you're going to love this next lens. One winner can fund a mountain of losses if you build your bets the right way.
Well, here's what I would say is that the winners, when you're doing these experiments, winners pay for thousands of losers. That's a good point. So when you're talking about, to put it in Amazon terms, we've had a few gigantic winners at Amazon. We've had Amazon Prime, our membership program. Amazon Web Services has been a gigantic winner. Our marketplace business, where we let third-party sellers compete against us on our primary retail real estate. Those are huge winners for Amazon. Each of those winners has more than paid for thousands of experiments. And so when you're talking about the kinds of experiments that you would be doing here at the Air Force, that I do at Amazon and at Blue Origin, the positive outcome is very long-tailed. You can get just gigantic. It's an analogy in baseball. Everybody knows that if you swing for the fences, you're going to hit more home runs, but you're also going to strike out more. Right? And in baseball, the most runs you can score when you're up at the plate is 4. Your upside is capped. It's not long-tailed. In business, and I bet it's true here at the Air Force as well, that upside isn't really capped. Every once in a while in business, you step up to the plate, you swing as hard as you can, and you get 1,000 runs. And so that long-tailed distribution of those possible outcomes is what makes experimenting worthwhile. And so when you're balancing the risk, you say the most I can lose is the cost of the experiment. And the value of the invention could be uncapped.
But there's a trap that kills invention as you grow, confusing new with repeatable. This is where a lot of capable people start playing not to lose.
And what happens in big organizations, Amazon's a big organization now too, the Air Force is a big organization, is that we start to confuse experimentation with operational excellence. So operational excellence is one of our 4 key principles at Amazon. We're building a fulfillment center. We've built over 150 large fulfillment centers around the world now. We know how to do that. That is not an experiment. If we build the 151st fulfillment center and screw it up, that's just a failure. That's not the kind of failure we're seeking. We want failures where we're trying to do something new, untested, never proven. That's a real experiment, and they come in all scale sizes. So you need to teach people that those 2 kinds of failure are different.
So the real leadership move isn't avoiding failure. It's designing for the right kind of failure. Listen for how bold bets get protected inside a culture that's wired to criticize what isn't working yet.
My job, one of my jobs as the leader of Amazon, is to encourage people to be bold. And people love to focus on things that aren't yet working. And that's good, it's human nature. That kind of divine discontent can be very helpful. But it's incredibly hard to get people to take bold bets. And you need to encourage that. And if you're going to take bold bets, they're going to be experiments. And if they're experiments, you don't know ahead of time whether they're going to work. Experiments are by their very nature prone to failure. But a few big successes compensate for dozens and dozens of things that didn't work. So, bold bets, AWS, Kindle, Amazon Prime, our third-party seller business, all of those things are examples of bold bets that did work, and they pay for a lot of experiments. I've made billions of dollars of failures at Amazon.com, literally billions of dollars of failures. And you might remember Pets.com or Cosmo, or give myself a root canal with no anesthesia very easily. None of those things are fun, but they don't matter. What really matters is companies that don't continue to experiment, companies that don't embrace failure, they eventually get in a desperate position where the only thing they can do is make a kind of Hail Mary bet at the very end of their corporate existence. Whereas companies that are, making bets all along, even, big bets, but not bet the company bets. I don't believe in bet the company bets. That's when you're desperate.
This is the moment you felt in the cold open, but now you'll hear why it matters in practice. Don't just nod at the quote. Ask yourself, where are you still optimizing to look right instead of building something real?
You misunderstood.
If you're going to do anything new or innovative, you have to be willing to be misunderstood. And if you can't tolerate that, then for God's sake, don't do anything new or innovative. Every important thing we've done has been misunderstood, often by well-meaning, sincere critics, sometimes, of course, by self-interested, insincere critics. But I'll give you an example. 1,000 years ago, we started this thing called customer reviews, and we let customers review books. We only sold books at that time, and customers could come in and rate a book between 1 and 5 stars, and they could write a text-based review. You guys are very familiar with this. It's now a very normal thing. But back then, this was crazy, and the book publishers, did not like this. Because, of course, not all the reviews are positive. And I got a letter from one publisher that said, I have a good idea for you. Why don't you just publish the positive customer reviews? And I thought about this, the argument he was making to me is that our sales would go up if we just published the positive customer reviews. And I thought about this, and I thought, I don't actually believe that, because I don't think we make money when we sell something, we make money when we help someone make a purchase decision. And it's just a slightly different way of looking at it, because people are, part of what they're paying us for is helping them make a purchase decision. And if you think about it that way, then you want the negative reviews too. And of course, it has been extremely helpful for people to have negative customer reviews. And by the way, it's come full circle now, where the product manufacturers use the customer reviews to improve the next generation of the product. So it's actually helping the whole ecosystem. And now nobody criticizes customer reviews. And in fact, if you were to, here in the year 2018, if some e-commerce company were to say, we're only going to publish the positive customer reviews, that would be the crazy thing that would get criticized. So the new and innovative quickly becomes the new normal.
Once you accept misunderstanding, the next bottleneck is speed. Watch how he turns better decision-making into a competitive advantage by labeling which choices are reversible.
But one of the things that happens is the decision-making velocity slows down. And I think one of the reasons that happens is that people, junior executives inside the big company, start to model all decisions as if they are heavyweight, irreversible, highly consequential decisions. And so even two-way doors, you make a decision, it's the wrong decision, you can just back through the door and try again. Even those reversible decisions start to be made with heavyweight processes. And so you can teach people that these pitfalls and traps, and then teach them to avoid those traps. And that's what we're trying to do at Amazon, so that we can maintain our inventiveness and our heart and our kind of small company spirit, even as we have the scale and scope of a larger company.
And if you've ever felt your ideas die in approval chains, this next concept is a cheat code. You don't need everyone to say yes. You need a system that allows one yes to be enough.
At Amazon, one of the things we try to do is have multiple paths to yes. And so here's a little thought experiment for you. If you are a junior executive at Amazon, and if Amazon did this in the typical kind of corporate hierarchy way, you had an idea. You need to get your boss to greenlight that idea, and then your boss's boss needs to greenlight that idea, and then your boss's boss's boss needs to greenlight that idea. There are probably 5 levels or more before that idea gets the go-ahead. Assume instead that you're an entrepreneur with a startup company idea and you need venture capital. You go to Sand Hill Road and you go to the first venture capitalist and they tell you no. And you go to the second one and they tell you no. Maybe your 20th one tells you yes. You got 19 no's and 1 yes, and you're still good to go. So that venture capital model there's multiple paths to yes. There were 20 people who could give you a yes, and it didn't matter how many gave you a no. So if you want innovative thinking, you have to think about how can we you want a large number of high judgment people empowered to greenlight things. You want multiple paths to yes. You want a system where, as a junior Air Force officer with a good idea, the first 5 people tell me no, and somehow I can still go pursue that idea.
Now he gets into the deeper game, culture, because your environment will either reward experimentation or quietly punish it until everyone stops trying.
Anyway, the question is, my opinion is that I can do some things at Amazon that would be hard for other people to do only because of my history with the company. And as the company has grown, of course, my job has changed very much. And my main job today is I'm kind of I work hard at helping to maintain the culture. A culture of high standards, of operational excellence, of inventiveness, of willingness to fail, willingness to make bold experiments. I'm the counterbalance to the institutional no who can say yes. But I won't, I'm not going to be here forever. Amazon is a really Many of the traits that make Amazon unusual are now deeply ingrained in the culture. In fact, if I wanted to change them, I couldn't. If I decided tomorrow that I wish Amazon did less pioneering and more close following, I couldn't do it. The culture.
Notice the thread tying everything together. A few principles that don't change even when the world does. This is how you stay steady while still moving fast.
But the cultural thread that runs through all of these things is the same. We only have a few principles at Amazon, kind of core values that we go back to over and over again. And if you looked at each of the things that we do, you would see those run straight through everything. So the first one, and by far the most important one, is customer obsession. And we talk about it as customer obsession as opposed to competitor obsession. And I have seen over and over again companies talk about that they're customer focused, but really when I pay close attention to them, I believe they are competitor focused. And that's just a completely different mentality. By the way, competitor focus can work, but I don't think it works in the long run as well as customer focused. For one thing, once you're the leader, if your whole culture is competitor obsessed, it's kind of hard to stay energized and motivated if you're out in front. Whereas customers are always unsatisfied, they're always discontent, they always want more. And so no matter how far you get out there in front of your competitors, you're still behind your customers. So they're always pulling you along. So customer obsession is a deep principle that underlies everything we do. Another one is eagerness to invent. So we love to pioneer. And when we have done, by the way, whenever we have tried to do something in a kind of Me Too fashion, we have failed at it. We need to have something that is differentiated, unique, something that customers are going to like, that we're kind of leading with. So that's another element that works for us. And then another one is long-term thinking. We are willing to take some time and be patient with our business initiatives, and that runs through everything. So a lot of our competitors might have 2 to 3 year kind of time frames, and we might have more of a 5 to 7 year sort of time frame. And then the last one, operational excellence. So literally, how do you have high standards around, identifying defects, fixing defects at the root, all of those kinds of things that lead to what I think also can be in a simpler way just stated as professionalism, that you want to do things right just for the sake of doing them right.
So let's talk about...
Here's a tension every ambitious person has to master: listening versus inventing. Listen for the 3-part rhythm. This is a practical operating system, not a slogan.
It means listen, invent, and personalize. So first you have to listen to customers. Companies that don't listen to customers fail. Second, you have to invent for customers, because companies that only listen to customers fail. It's not the customer's job to invent for themselves. It's our job at Amazon.com to invent things like one-click and other things, like sales rank going from 1 to 18 million. Those kinds of things that customers really like. That's our job, not theirs, to think of that. And third is personalize. Take every individual customer and put them at the center of their own universe.
If you want to build what people will love tomorrow, you can't outsource thinking to surveys today. This next clip shows how to use customer insight without becoming trapped by it.
How would you advise young founders in practical terms to be able to be in harmony with both?
The touchstone, the thing you always go back to, is those customer needs. So that's the only way that I could advise any founder or entrepreneur, is to deeply understand what are the big ideas that their customers want. And you should ask them, ask your customers, but it's not sufficient. You also have to invent on their behalf, because the biggest breakthroughs, the most important ideas, customers don't know to ask. They don't know to ask for those things. That's why you have to dream, and you have to use your intuition and your gut and your heart. All of the data that gets used in business is essential. If you're in business and you're not looking at your data, trust me, your competitors are going to beat you. But if you're only looking at your data, you also will not win, or at least not win big. Because the most important decisions that every person makes when they're building something new is made with intuition. You cannot prove it, but you have an instinct and a hunch. And then you'll pay attention. If that turns out to be wrong, it won't be a big deal. You'll correct.
Now for a real example. The kind of product nobody would have requested until it existed. Pay attention to the point about team invention, because that's how you scale creativity beyond one brain.
It is not, by the time we end up, Echo is the Echo Alexa, speaker. That is an example of an invention that no customer asked for. If we had gone to customers, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, whenever it was that we put Echo on the drawing board, customers, and we said, look, would you buy a black cylinder that you plug into the wall in your kitchen and you can ask it what time it is, set timers, ask it what the weather is, ask it to play music for you? They'd have been like, no, I will not buy that. And so we invented that, but there was no single person who invented it. It was team invention.
Big ideas don't survive on optimism. They survive on adaptability. This next line is a discipline you can borrow immediately. Hold the vision, flex the root.
And so that's another way that long-term thinking is protective, because it forces you to think about the real customer needs, to center those as your big ideas, and then put energy into them in 100 ways, and to be very dynamic. I'd always say be stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details. And you have to be, because the world is changing and you change your mind. I've noticed that people who are right a lot change their mind a lot.
Here's the permission slip high performers need. Efficiency and invention don't play nicely together. If you're always rushing, you may be starving the very process that creates breakthroughs.
Efficiency and invention are sort of at odds, because invention, real invention, not incremental improvement. Incremental improvement is so important in every endeavor and everything you do. You have to work hard on also just making things a little bit better. But I'm talking about real invention, real lateral thinking. That requires wandering. And you have to give yourself permission to wander. I think a lot of people, they feel like wandering is inefficient and, like when I sit down at a meeting, I don't know how long the meeting is going to take if we're trying to solve a problem, because if I did, then I'd know there's some kind of straight line that we're drawing to the solution. The reality is we may have to wander for a long time.
And when you do wander, the early version of a great idea is fragile. Listen for how he protects the kernel from easy objections long enough to evolve.
And when you wander, I think one key thing is to notice a good idea, and to notice the kernel of a good idea. Maybe pull at that string, because I don't think good ideas come fully formed.
100% right. In fact, when I come up with what I think is a good idea, and it survives kind of the first level of scrutiny, that I do in my own head, and I'm ready to tell somebody else about the idea, I will often say, look, it is going to be really easy for you to find objections to this idea, but work with me.
There's something there.
There's something there, and that is intuition.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to kill new ideas in the beginning, because they do have so many easy objections to them. So you need to kind of forewarn people and say, look, I know it's going to take a lot of work to get this to a fully formed idea. Let's get started on that. It'll be fun.
This next point is uncomfortable, but freeing. The decisions that change your life often can't be solved by spreadsheets. The skill is knowing when analysis ends and judgment begins.
So we have some very specific ideas of what we want to do, but I believe in the power of wandering. All of my best decisions in business and in life have been made with heart intuition, guts, not analysis. When you can make a decision with analysis, you should do so. But it turns out in life that your most important decisions are always made with instinct, intuition, taste, heart. And that's what we'll do with this day one foundation too. And the customer is going to...
Now he goes after something you were born with and might have trained out of yourself. Beginner's mind. Listen for the paradox. Expertise is required, but certainty is the enemy.
So we all have this inside of us. If you look at kids, they're all inventive. They're all doing crazy things. They literally, I actually saw one time one of my kids put a square peg in a round hole. And as he was doing it, I was thinking, that's never going to work. And then it fit. And I was like, gosh, that's amazing. And so little kids try things, and we all do that when we're little, and some of us lose it. You need to have, one of the great paradoxes of inventing at a high level is that you need to be an expert in your domain area, and you need to have a beginner's mind. You absolutely need both of those things. The world is too complex to actually just be a beginner. So, I can't, no matter how inventive I am, I can't go invent a new kind of brain surgery. You have to be a neurosurgeon. You have to already know all there is to know about brain surgery and then take it to the next level. The problem is, for many people, by the time they become true experts, they've lost that ability to see things in a fresh way. They've lost the beginner's mind.
Here's what invention looks like at home. Raising humans who can handle tools, risk, and reality. This isn't about parenting. It's about building resourcefulness as a core life trait.
We let our kids use, even now they're 17 through 12, but even when they were 4, we would let them use sharp knives. And by the time they were, maybe 7 or 8, we would let them use certain power tools. And my wife, much to her credit, she has this great saying. She says, I would much rather have a kid with 9 fingers than a resourceless kid. And which I just think is a fantastic attitude about life.
Resourcefulness isn't a personality. You build it through reps. Notice how he reframes setbacks, not as proof you're failing, but as practice inventing your way out.
Well, I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs and people pursuing dreams and passions in this God. And you always the whole point of moving things forward is you run into problems, you run into failures, things don't work, you have to back up and try again. Each one of those times when you have a setback and you back up and you try again, you're using resourcefulness, you're using self-reliance, you're trying to invent your way out of a box. And we have tons of examples at Amazon where we've had to do this. We've failed so many times. I always think of us as a great place to fail because we're good at it. We have so much practice. And just to give you one example, many years ago now, we wanted a third-party selling business because we knew we could add selection to the store that way. And we started Amazon auctions. Nobody came. I think maybe our mother is the only one who purchased something on Amazon auctions.
I bought a coffee cup.
You got a coffee cup?
I did.
Okay, so there were 2 purchasers. And then we said, well, what can we do? We opened this thing called Z-Shops, which was like fixed price auctions. Again, nobody came.
I didn't use that.
And then finally, each one of these failures is like a year and a half long. And so we're trying to invent new things. And we finally came across this idea of putting the third-party selection on the same detail pages, the same product detail pages that we had our own inventory on, our own retail inventory on. We called this marketplace, and it started working right away. So that resourcefulness of trying new things, figuring things out, what the customers really want, it pays off in everything. And it pays off even in your daily lives. How do you...
Now a sharp turn. Innovation without character collapses eventually. This next story is a gut check, because being clever will get you attention, but being kind builds something people actually want to be part of.
And so he pulled me around, he took me out of the car, and took me out to the back side of the car. She's still in the front seat, tears coming down her cheeks. And he said to me, I had no idea what he was going to say, and he said to me, Jeff, one day you'll understand that it's harder to be kind than it is to be clever.
And the reason I think this is a very meaningful lesson, is because there's this idea that technology is clever but not kind.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's a choice. And technology is just a tool that one can use.
If you're standing at a crossroads right now, lock in. This is a decision framework you can use when fear is loud and the stakes are real. Picture the regret you'll live with.
And the framework I found, which made the decision incredibly easy, was what I called, which only a nerd would call, a regret minimization framework. So I wanted to project myself forward to age 80 and say, okay, now I'm looking back on my life. I want to have minimized the number of regrets I have. And I knew that when I was 80, I was not going to regret having tried this. I was not going to regret having trying to participate in this thing called the internet that I thought was going to be a really big deal. I knew that if I failed, I wouldn't regret that. But I knew the one thing I might regret is not ever having tried. And I knew that that would haunt me every day. And so when I thought about it that way, it was an incredibly easy decision.
Frameworks are powerful, but they still need a signal worth betting on. Watch how he spots a wave early, then makes it concrete by choosing a specific starting point.
I came across the fact, so this is 1994, nobody has heard of the internet, very, very few people. And I came across the fact that the web, World Wide Web, was growing at something like 2,300% a year. This is in 1994, and anything growing that fast is, even if its baseline usage today is tiny, it's growing so fast, it's gonna be big. And so I looked at that and I was like, there's gotta be, I should come up with a business idea and that get, on the internet, and then let the internet grow around this, and we can keep working on it. And so I made a list of products that I might sell online, and I started force ranking them. And I picked books because books is super unusual in one respect, which is that there are more book items in the book category than there are items in any other category. There are 3 million different books active and in print around the world at any given time. So the founding idea of Amazon was to build universal selection of books. The biggest bookstores only had 150,000 titles. And so that's what I did.
And then comes the unglamorous part, thinking it through. Pay attention to why planning matters even when the plan will be wrong. This is about building mental leverage.
Well, the first thing you do is you should write a business plan. And so I did that. I wrote about a 30-page business plan. I wrote a first draft. In fact, I wrote the first draft on the car trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. And that was that is very helpful. Now, the business plan won't survive its first encounters with reality. It will always be different. The reality will never be the plan. But the discipline of writing the plan forces you to think through some of the issues and to get sort of mentally comfortable in the space. I mean, then you start to understand, if you push on this knob, this will move over here, and so on. And so that's the first step.
Now, you'll hear what invention looks like on the floor, not on a stage. This is a reminder. Your first answer is often the smaller answer until someone sees the obvious upgrade.
We were packing on our hands and knees on a hard concrete floor. And I remember, just to show you how stupid I can be, my only defense is that it was late. But we were packing these things, everybody in the company. And I had this brainstorm. And as I said to the person next to me, this packing is killing me. My back hurts. This is killing my knees on this hard cement floor. And the person said, yeah, I know what you mean. And I said, you know what we need? This is my brilliant insight. We need knee pads. I was very serious. And this person looked at me like I was the stupidest person they'd ever seen. They're like, I'm working for this person. This is great. And said, what we need is packing tables. And I looked at this person and I thought that was the smartest idea I'd ever heard. The next day we got packing tables and I think we doubled our productivity.
That early stage, by the way, of Amazon.com, where we were so unprepared, is probably one of the luckiest things that ever happened to us, because it formed a culture of customer service in every department of the company, every single person in the company, because we had to work with our hands so close to the customers, making sure those orders went out, really set up a culture that served us well. And that is our goal, to be Earth's most customer-centric company.
This next clip is about building the invisible engine behind the experience. If you want your ideas to matter, you have to translate them into systems that reliably serve real people.
And those are things I'm very, very proud of, because with that distribution center space and half a dozen distribution centers around the country, it allows us to get product close to customers so that we can ship it to customers in a very timely way, which improves customer service levels. That's what we're about. If there's one thing Amazon.com is about, it's obsessive attention to the customer experience, end to end. And that's what those distribution centers are.
But you're not a pure internet play.
It doesn't matter to me whether we're a pure internet play. What matters to me is, do we provide the best customer service? Internet, that doesn't matter.
When pressure hits, your focus reveals your maturity. Listen for the refrain. Don't fear rivals. Fear losing touch with the people you're here to serve.
So, and I said, look, it's okay to be afraid, but don't be afraid of our competitors, because they're never going to send us any money. Be afraid of our customers. And if we just stay focused on them, and instead of obsessing over this big competitor that we just got, we'll be fine. And I really do believe that. I think that if you stay focused, then the more drama there is and everything else, no matter what the drama is, whatever the external distraction is, what your response to it should be to double down on the customer, satisfying them, not just satisfying them, delighting them. Yeah.
Here's a counterintuitive lesson that applies to your career, too. When something is working, the danger isn't moving too fast. It's hesitating while momentum is on your side.
And that was the worst mistake any company could have made. Because when you are growing week over week at such high growth rates, and clearly have a value proposition that customers love, you need to be figuring out how to invest in that. So for us, that meant investing in new geographies, which is very expensive.
And if you copy what already exists, you'll always be in someone else's shadow. This next idea forces a higher standard. Stop replicating. Start inventing what only this new environment makes possible.
But you can do wonderful things online that are just as much fun. So you have to find the new thing. So it really is all about invention and not replication. That's why the physical world metaphors can be so misleading. Many of the intuitions built out of that experience just turn out to be wrong.
Notice how consistent he is about what he actually loves, the act of inventing. That's a clue for you. Your edge grows fastest where your energy naturally spikes.
The thing I love is the inventing. So I do the business and I enjoy it, but I don't love it. Yeah. The thing that I love is getting with one of our product teams and figuring out things like, the next generation of customer reviews, or how we're going to let trusted friends see each other's purchases, which is the latest feature we rolled out.
Now he opens up the real mechanics, invention as a team sport. Listen for the cycle, idea, objections, improvements, because that's what turns a spark into a product.
Very interesting. So like many inventions inside of a team, and I love team inventing is my favorite thing. So I tap dance into the office. I love Amazon. I have so much fun there. I love Blue Origin. I love the Washington Post. But Amazon is my full-time job. And I get to invent. I get to live 2 to 3 years in the future. And most of the invention we do there is, somebody has an idea and then other people improve the idea and other people come up with objections why it can never work, and then we solve those objections, and it's a very fun process. We're always wondering, what could a loyalty program be? And then actually kind of a junior software engineer came up with this idea, not as a loyalty program, but this idea that we could offer people kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet of fast, free shipping. And when we modeled that, so then, the finance team went and modeled that idea. And the results were horrifying. That we would offer unlimited shipping. Shipping is expensive. And customers love free shipping. But we could see, again, back to that you have to use heart and intuition. There has to be risk taking. You have to have instinct. All the good decisions have to be made that way. You do it with a group. You do it with great humility. Because, by the way, getting it wrong isn't that bad. That's the other thing. When we make mistakes, and we've made doozies like the Fire Phone and many other things that just didn't work out, we don't have enough time for me to list all of our failed experiments. But the big winners pay for thousands of failed experiments. So you try something like Prime, and it was very expensive at the beginning. It cost us a lot of money, because what happens when you offer a free all-you-can-eat buffet? Who shows up to the buffet first? The heavy eaters. It's scary. It's like, oh my God, did I really say as many prawns as you can eat? Oh. And so that is what happened. But surely we could see the trend lines. We could see that, all kinds of customers were coming, and they appreciated that service.
Here's a powerful way to expand without losing your center. Start from a need, or start from a capability. Pay attention to how both paths require humility, because you'll be bad before you're good.
And then sometimes, we expand into new areas in two ways. One is kind of, from a customer need. We will work from a customer need to the skills that we need. And the other one is skills forward, from a skill set we have to a new set of customers. So Kindle is an example of a customer need, and so we don't have any hardware skills. We've been doing this for 10 years now, but if you go back in time 10 years, we had no hardware team. We had to hire somebody to lead our hardware group, and then build a hardware team and build some institutional competence at it, and so on. That's a customer need backwards approach. And then skills forward, a great example of that is Amazon Web Services. We had the skills to do AWS. We had probably more distributed computing expertise than anybody else in the world, because of the transactions. Transaction systems are so complicated and hard to build, and we had a service-oriented architecture of great complexity, probably before anybody else. And so because we were doing that, we could kind of see the future a little bit, and decided to build AWS, which has turned into a huge business in its own right.
Now we get more technical, but the lesson is universal. Remove friction so builders can build. This is what it looks like to invent leverage inside a complex system.
So the founding idea behind Amazon Web Services is that our applications engineers and our networking and data center engineers were spending way too much time coordinating. And so the applications engineers are the ones who build the things that customers actually interact with. They drive the business forward. They drive revenues. Building data centers and building, putting servers in the data centers and building fleets of servers and getting the right levels of capacity and making sure all the operating system versions are correct and so on and so on. Getting the right databases on top of those servers, making sure the versions of those are correct. All of the networking that goes into this stuff is unbelievably complicated and hard. It's every bit as hard as building the application layer. But it doesn't really add any value to the application layer. It's a kind of price of admission. It's one of those things that has to be done perfectly, but it's not secret sauce. It's not going to change the way you run your business. And what we wanted to do was reduce those fine-grained conversations that the applications engineers were having with the networking engineers. And so we said, well, we should just create a set of APIs, application programming interfaces, harden those, and then the teams can discuss the roadmap years out, next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. They can discuss in a coarse-grained way the roadmap of what APIs we should expose, and then it'll simplify those conversations and give everybody a lot of stability, and they won't need to do all these silly fine-grained coordination conversations. And so we started designing that, and the second we started writing it down, we realized, wait a second, what we're building here, we need. Amazon.com, the retailer, needs these things, but pretty soon, everybody's going to need these things. And so with a little extra work, we can turn what we were going to build just for ourselves into a service for the world, and that's what we did. And
there's a hidden opportunity in what you build for yourself. It might solve someone else's problem, too. Listen for how an internal tool becomes a world-changing offering.
We basically, we started out building these services or designing these services for ourselves so that we could use them internally. And the more we thought about it, and the more we liked the idea of these services and of this abstraction layer, that we could abstract away the physical hardware, we realized if this would be helpful to a web scale application like Amazon.com, because that's all Amazon is. It is, it itself is a big web scale application. If it would be helpful to us, it would probably be helpful to others. And with a little extra work, we could externalize these services and turn them into, hopefully, a profit center and meaningful business for Amazon. And so that's what we did. We did not expect this level of traction this early. We're delighted by it.
If you've ever wondered why weird ideas win, this is why. Competitors can't copy what they don't respect yet. Listen for the runway concept and ask how you can buy time by being early and unconventional.
It appears to me just empirically that if you invent a new way of doing something, typically, if you're lucky, you get about 2 years of runway before competitors copy your idea. And 2 years is actually a pretty long time in a fast-moving industry, so that's a big head start. For whatever reason, and I have a hypothesis of what the reason is, but for whatever reason, Amazon Web Services got 7 years of runway before we faced like-minded competition. There were other people doing similar kinds of things, but not the same way and not with the same approach and the same mindset. And in my experience, it's unheard of to get so much runway. And I think the reason that happened is because the incumbents in technology for enterprises, sort of infrastructure technology for enterprises, thought that what we were doing was just so damn weird that it could never work. So we just kept very quiet about it, and we knew it was working. And we would read news stories that would say things like, "Do you really think anybody is going to buy mission critical enterprise infrastructure from an online bookseller?" And we would look at that. Certain people were opining on that, and we would read those articles, and we would look at our business statements, and we'd be like, "Well, they are." So we kind of knew, but it was. So we got very lucky. That was a gift, and what that allowed us to do was build a gigantic advantage in terms of the feature set and the service offerings and the cost structure and everything else that you just can't wave a magic wand and do that quickly. It takes years and years.
Now bring it back to you. Great invention doesn't just create features. It changes what's practical. This example is about designing options so you're not forced into all or nothing gambles.
And you can see that they've gone from 50 instances of EC2 usage up to 3,500 instances of EC2 usage. Now, it's completely impractical in your own data center over the course of 3 days to scale from 50 servers to 3,500 servers. Don't try this at home. And by the way, if the other alternative might be to raise enough capital to deploy 3,500 servers, that's sort of equally insane because it's just way too big of a gamble. You don't know whether you're going to get this app to take off in that way, and you shouldn't be deploying that kind of capital.
Here's where big ideas come from. Seeing the present like the past once looked. Listen for the analogy, because analogies aren't fluff. They're pattern recognition in action.
I went to a brewery in Luxembourg many years ago now. In fact, this trip was one of the little tiny catalysts for the founding of AWS. And the brewery was 300 years old, this company making beer for 300 years. A lot of the oldest companies in the world are breweries, by the way. I don't know why this is. And they were very proud of their history, and they had a museum. And in that museum was an electric power generator, 100 years old. And because when they wanted to improve the efficiency of their brewery with electricity,
There was no power grid, so they had to build their own power station. So they made their own electricity. And at that time, that's what everybody did. If a hotel wanted electricity, they had their own electric generator. And I looked at this and I thought, this is what computation is like today. Everybody has their own data center. And that's not going to last. It makes no sense. You're going to buy compute off the grid. That's AWS.
He doubles down on that same analogy here, and it matters because it shows you how to forecast. Don't predict the future from vibes. Compare it to a proven historical shift.
And one way to look at the future of something is to find an analog from the past. Does anybody know what this is? It might not be immediately obvious. This is an electric power generator, an old one. I was in Luxembourg recently, and I took a tour of a 300-year-old brewery. Their business, of course, is making beer. And about 100 years ago, they were one of the first factories in Luxembourg to start using electric power to help make beer, to help in the manufacturing process. And of course, they couldn't buy the electric power off of the electric grid because there wasn't an electric grid. So they started making their own electric power. And a lot of companies did that in that era. If you could make your operations more efficient or do new things with electric power, the only way to get power was to set up your own generator and become an expert in electric power generation. The important thing to notice here is that the fact that they generated their own electric power did not make their beer taste better. And what startup companies want, actually companies of all sizes, is they want to go from their idea or their vision to a successful product as quickly as possible. And the problem always is that there's a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting that gets in the middle between your idea, vision, and that successful product. The undifferentiated heavy lifting, by the way, has to be done at world-class levels of excellence or your vision will fail, but it's totally undifferentiated and isn't actually making the beer taste better. In the case of data centers, which I think are a pretty obvious analog for electric power generation of 100 years ago, this price of admission, the kinds of things you have to do at a world-class level are very, very hard. It's very complex to build infrastructure, build scalable infrastructure, build sensible infrastructure. It's always changing. Operating system versions always have to be upgraded. You end up with heterogeneous environments inside your data centers, which further complicates. As you get any scale at all, you just have to start doing some forecasting for capacity planning. How many new servers am I going to need 3 months from now? How many new servers am I going to need 6 months from now? As soon as you're in that world, things get very complex indeed. And of course, you don't get to go through this undifferentiated heavy lifting just once. The successful companies are the ones who iterate as quickly as possible. They deploy their vision in the form of a product, and then they have to change it, iterate, and through each one of those iterations, there often are infrastructural pieces that have to be upgraded or changed or scaled, and this can really slow down the pace of invention and innovation.
Now for the responsibility side of invention. As the pace accelerates, the question isn't just, can we build it? It's, what kind of humans will we be while we build it?
You know, if you look over long periods of time, look over hundreds of years, and look at the average sort of life cycle of a new technology, what you find is that it's getting compressed and compressed and compressed. So the rate of change is getting faster and faster. Every decade that goes by, there are sort of more important discoveries per unit time than there were in the previous decade. And a lot of these discoveries tend to have two uses. I mean, technologies tend to be agnostic with respect to whether they can be used for good or used for evil. And I think that over the next 50 years, we are going to face a lot of very tough decisions as a society in how we make sure that we are harnessing those technologies for good purposes.
And with that pace comes a promise. The future will still surprise you if you stay in the arena. Listen for what he thinks the next interface shift will be and why it changes how individuals act.
Well, so first of all, I think there are some amazing inventions to be made in this world that I think will shock people. And some of those we've already got on the drawing board and are working on, and they'll roll out over the next couple of years. So that is, I mean, there's still stuff in e-commerce that people will be startled by, even kind of in the realm of where it is today. I think if you take the next big step, I believe that for mobile commerce, the thing that's going to be the biggest part of that is voice. And I think there's a lot that can happen where when you're on the run and you need to get something done on your to-do list, you should be able to talk to Amazon.com. So, people should be able to call Amazon.com and talk to an automated voice, and not, in the short term, it'll be kind of a stilted, special purpose language for talking to Amazon.com. But in the long term, it could even be natural language processing. I think that is a real mind bender.
This next clip is your permission to think bigger about your own impact. In a connected world, a single determined person can move markets. So the real question is what you're willing to build and stand behind.
The thing that I think is amazing about it is it's an indication of how a single person can influence the world when the world is as networked as it is now becoming.
A single person who's 19 years old.
That's right. So this is a 19-year-old with no team, acting as an individual in his college dorm room, who builds a piece
who's 20 years old,
who builds a piece of software and releases it to the world. And just a short number of months later, every record label is suing him. 5 years ago, you could not possibly, no matter how hard you tried as an individual, have gotten every major record label to sue you.
There's nothing you could have done.
No, you couldn't have done it. They would have ignored you.
They would have said, you're irrelevant, go have fun,
they wouldn't have given you the pleasure.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is truly a remarkable indication of the ability of a single person in this networked world, a single person with a powerful idea to change the world.
But does it also suggest that around the corner, I mean, is the threat of somebody who could come along, not the threat, somebody come along because just like this, and dramatically change the notion of the way we know the web today?
I think that is the
likely, or
I think that's the world we live in.
Now we circle back to identity. Inventor, not manager of the status quo. Notice what he says he needs around him. Small teams, a whiteboard, and the courage to explore without getting lost.
That reality is the inventor, and Amazon was an invention. Blue Origin is an invention, and there are many inventions that you've been making, and that's what really is interesting for you. How can you make sure that as you invent, and one of the main topics that we've discussed is how it's important to wonder, how it's important to explore. But as you invent and you wonder, how were you able not to get lost?
Well, that is such a good question, and really my best thing, my favorite thing, is to be with a small group of people with a big whiteboard in front of me and inventing. I am an inventor. This is my fundamental nature. And I remember one time we had an executive at Amazon for many, many years, a guy named Jeff Wilke, who was instrumental in the success of the company. We've been gifted with a large number of fantastic executives, including Diego Piacentini, who I think might be in the audience somewhere. And thank you, Diego. Diego's contributions to Amazon are legendary.
And to Vento too. Thank you, Diego.
And so one day in the early days, because I literally put me in front of a whiteboard and I can come up with 100 ideas in half an hour. And early in Amazon's history, Jeff Wilke came to me one day. He worked for Amazon for a quarter of a century, but this is when he probably knew me only for a year. And he said, Jeff, you have enough ideas to destroy Amazon. And this was such a shocking idea for me. And As a founder, I had the great luxury of always being able to hire my tutors. They would hire these experienced senior executives, brilliant people like Diego and Jeff Wilkie, and there were several others too. And I would listen to them, and they would teach me. And Jeff said, you have enough ideas per minute, per day, per week to destroy Amazon. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you have to release the work at the right rate that the organization can accept it. And he was a manufacturing expert, and so his view of the world was every time I released an idea, I was creating a backlog, a queue, work in process. And because it was just stacking up, it was adding no value, and in fact, it was creating distraction. And so he said, look, you have to figure out when to release these new ideas at a rate that the organization can accept them. And this sounds so obvious, but it was not obvious at the time to me. And this was a profound insight for me. And so I started prioritizing the ideas better, keeping lists of them, keeping them to myself until the organization was ready for the ideas. And then I also started figuring out, how can I build an organization that can be ready for more ideas? That's about having the right senior team and the right leadership and getting those people the executive bandwidth so that they could do more ideas per unit time. And that is what we built. We built a company that's very good at inventing and doing more than one thing at a time. And you do want to build, as the company gets bigger, you do want to be able to do more than one thing at a time. But that idea of releasing the work was very profound for me. And it made us operationally more effective while still being inventive.
Here's another fuel source for invention, a passion that won't let go of you. Listen for the line that matters, because when the work is hard, passion is what keeps you in motion.
Space is a passion of mine. You don't choose your passions choose you. And since I was 5 years old, I've been obsessive about space travel and wanting to be an astronaut and to go into space. And I have started a company called Blue Origin that is building a vertical takeoff, vertical landing rocket. It's a suborbital rocket. So you'll get up into space and then come back down. The rocket is reusable, and it re-enters and lands on its tail like a Buck Rogers rocket under rocket power. So that is, and we've finished our first development vehicle, and we flew that, and we're working on our second development vehicle now, and there'll be at least one more development vehicle after that. And then, hopefully at some point we'll enter commercial operations. So it is pretty exciting. I can tell you also, just to kind of tie the two subjects together.
He reinforces it here. Some pursuits aren't chosen for maximum certainty. They're chosen because they're yours. This is a challenge to stop negotiating with your calling.
Back up. This is a childhood dream. I fell in love with the idea of space and space exploration and space travel when I was 5 years old, and I watched Neil Armstrong step onto the moon. And you don't choose your passions choose you. So I'm infected with this idea. It's, I couldn't ever stop thinking about space. I've been thinking about it ever since then. And I did, so again, I did not, just when I started Blue Origin, which is the name of this space company, I did not make a list of all the businesses in the world where I thought I might get the highest return on invested capital. And it was driven by passion and curiosity and the need to explore the things that I care about.
Now the vision expands to civilization scale. Whether you care about space or not, listen for the mindset. Think in preconditions, not wishes. What has to become cheap, reliable, and repeatable for the future to open up?
For whatever reason, since I'm a teenager, and in fact, there's a high school newspaper article, my Miami Palmetto Senior High, they wrote an article about my space plans, which I would tell everyone who would stand still long enough about. And those plans included
what I still think, what I am still working on, which is moving all polluting industry off Earth. And so my view, but I know that sounds fantastical. So I beg the indulgence of this audience to bear with me for a moment, but it's not fantastical. This is going to happen. And we need to lower the cost of access to space low enough, and that's what New Glenn, our orbital vehicle, is all about.
And here's the long game. You may not finish the mission, but you can set the table. This is how builders think. Create conditions that future generations can compound.
And if we can lower the costs enough, and we will, I mean, it may take, who knows how many years it will take, but we can set up the preconditions where the next generation or the generation after that will be able to move polluting industry off Earth. And then this planet will be maintained as it should be, and can kind of be, you can sort of think of it as zoned residential and light industry. And if you want to use large amounts of energy and large amounts of pollutants and so on, you go do that off Earth. And so we get the best of both.
Now, the engineer in him takes over with a simple first principles question. Why is this so expensive? Listen closely. This is a model for how you can attack any problem that feels just the way it is.
Key. If you ask the question, why is space travel so expensive? There is one reason, and it's because we throw the hardware away every time after using it. It's all expendable. And even in the past, when we've done things that were sort of semi-reusable, they weren't really what I would call operable reusability, because they were disassembled, inspected, and then put back together. So you can imagine how expensive air travel would be if after your Hawaii vacation, you get to Hawaii and, if they throw the 747 away, it's going to be really expensive. But it's also going to be super expensive if after you get to Hawaii, they disassemble the whole thing, inspect every part, and put it all back together before you're allowed to fly again. That was the problem with the space shuttle. And so it's really important that you design the vehicle from the beginning for highly operable reusability. The propellants are incredibly low cost. People don't know this about rockets, but a big rocket, let's say it has 1 million pounds of propellant on board, 2/3 of that may be liquid oxygen, say 600,000 pounds or so of liquid oxygen. You know how much liquid oxygen costs? 10 cents a pound. So that's $60,000 worth of liquid oxygen. And then add the fuel costs in. You're still talking about a few $100,000 in propellant costs. In the launch, costs on the order of 60, 70, 80, 100, $150 million. So how do you get from $100 million, it's $100 million to $300,000 of propellants? It's simple, you're throwing the hardware away. And so it's really now, the engineering challenge involved in building a highly operable, reusable vehicle is gigantic. But if you can do that, it's a game changer. You change everything. And
Speaker shift. Now Tim Dodd, bringing the behind-the-scenes wonder. Listen for how invention looks when it's real. Measuring, adjusting, correcting, layer by layer until impossible becomes landing on a pad.
So, you go up, and we do something very unusual. On the way up, we measure using just inertial navigation, and so we can measure the high altitude winds. Just by how we know how we're steering the vehicle, and we know where the vehicle's actually going. And so we can impute the high altitude winds. And then we adjust for those on ascent so that when we come back down, the high altitude winds will blow us directly over the landing pad.
No way.
And that corrects most of the error. But then the remaining error gets corrected by these fins so that we can fly over the landing pad.
Yeah.
And then the final error gets corrected by the terminal descent maneuver. So anyway, there's a lot going on. The fact that something like this lands propulsively proves that math works.
Yeah.
Staying with Tim Dodd, this is what curiosity looks like with teeth. One question, one search, and suddenly you're in a project that forces you to become more capable than you were yesterday.
I was sitting in my living room one day, and I said, I wonder if you could find those F1 engines from Apollo 11 sitting on the bottom of the Atlantic somewhere. And I went to Google and I typed in Apollo 11 booster impact coordinates.
Yep.
And they popped up. They had radar tracked it all the way to impact.
Right.
And so I thought, this is going to be the easiest thing I've ever done. I'm going to go recover those engines. Of course, that was the only part of it that was easy. It turned out to be
Back to Jeff Bezos, and he's going to challenge a popular fantasy. Listen carefully. This isn't about escaping problems. It's about having the backbone to make Plan A work.
And it's not, for me, it's not the, there's a very kind of common argument that's been around for a long time, actually kind of first popularized by Arthur C. Clarke, who said all civilizations become spacefaring or extinct. And this is the kind of Plan B argument that, when Earth is destroyed somehow, we better make sure that we don't have all of our eggs in one basket. And I hate the Plan B argument. I think, Plan B with respect to Earth being destroyed is make sure Plan A works. So we have sent robotic probes to every planet in this solar system. Believe me, this is the best one. We know that. It's not even close. My friends who say they want to move to Mars or something, I say, why don't you go live in Antarctica for a year first? Because it's a garden paradise compared to Mars. And so we really, this planet is so amazing. It's a jewel in our solar system. And we have, if you take baseline energy usage on Earth and just compound it at a few percent a year for just a few hundred years, you have to cover the entire Earth's surface in solar cells. So that's not going to happen. So we have two choices. We either go out into space or we switch over to a civilization of stasis. And personally, I do not like the idea of stasis. We have, our grandchildren and their grandchildren will live in a much better world if they can continue to advance and develop and use more energy and all of the things that we've enjoyed for hundreds of years as a civilization of growth. I don't even really believe in stasis. I think things are either growing or shrinking. I think stasis is highly unusual and real life doesn't exist. I don't even think liberty is consistent with the idea of stasis. I mean, if you get real stasis, somebody's going to have to tell you how many kids you can have, how much energy you can use. There'll be all kinds of things that just aren't consistent with liberty and freedom. So, but in space, we have, for all practical purposes, unlimited resources. We could have 1 trillion humans in the solar system and still wouldn't be crowded. And so then if you had 1 trillion humans, you'd have 1,000 Einsteins and 1,000 Mozarts and 1,000 Da Vincis. And how cool would that be? But we have to go to space. And we have to go to space to save Earth. That's why this work is so important. And we don't have forever to do it. We've now gotten so big as a civilization on Earth that we kind of have to hurry. And so
Now he zooms out to the deepest driver. Your life gets different when your work becomes a calling. Don't just hear this as career advice. Hear it as identity advice.
I think the most important work that I'm doing, and I get increasing conviction on this with every passing year, is the work I'm doing at Blue Origin on space travel.
Okay. Well, why don't we talk about that?
Okay.
Because I think from a vision standpoint, I think people should appreciate the horizon that you have. So let's talk about your I'll call it your near-term objectives. Well, let's say 75 years.
Yeah.
And then your long-term objectives 100 to 300 years from now.
Well, so first of all, you don't choose your passions choose you. And all of us are gifted with certain passions, and the people who are lucky are the ones who get to follow those things. And I always advise our young employees, I meet with interns and so on, you can have, and my kids too, you can have a job, or you can have a career, or you can have a calling. And if you can somehow figure out how to have a calling, you have hit the jackpot, because that's the big deal. And most people don't ever get there. You're very lucky if you have a career. A lot of people end up with a job. And so, for me, I have been interested in rockets, space travel, propulsion, since I was a 5-year-old boy. And I have spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about it. So it's not like I really have a choice to follow this passion. It has captured me. But I think it's very important that we go out into space as a civilization. And the reason is not the one that I think is very common. There are many reasons that are given. One of the reasons that is out there, and it's a very old idea, one of the people who first articulated it very well was Arthur C. Clarke. He said, all civilizations become spacefaring or extinct. And that even may be technically true in a long run, kind of long enough horizon. But that idea is it has kind of come to be that we've got all our eggs in one basket, and we need a plan B. You know, if we had a civilization elsewhere on another planet, somewhere in the solar system, then when Earth gets destroyed, humanity will still be fine. I find this particular argument incredibly unmotivating. We have now sent robotic probes to every planet in this solar system. Believe me, this is the best one. It is not close. My friends who want to move to Mars, I say, I have an idea for you. Why don't you first, for a year, move to the top of Mount Everest? Because the top of Mount Everest is a garden paradise compared to Mars. And so it's this planet is a gem. This planet is unbelievable, and as you travel around, the more you travel around, the more you see how incredible it is. And I'm not even just talking about nature. I'm talking about the civilization we built and the urban cities that we have, and all of these amazing things. And so we need to protect it. Now, and I'm not even talking about protecting it from asteroids or nuclear holocaust or anything, although all those things are probably important and valid. But we don't need to worry about that because we have something more certain that is a problem. And that is if you take current baseline energy usage on Earth today, global energy usage, and compound that at just 3% a year, then in just a few hundred years, you're going to have to cover the entire surface of the Earth in solar cells. That's how powerful compounding is. So, and by the way, we have been growing energy usage at a few percent a year for a long time. So, our civilization has a lot of advantages because we increase our energy usage. The human body, in a state of nature, if you are just an animal in the state of nature, your body, your metabolic rate, uses about 100 watts of power. But a modern person living in a developed country, you actually use your all-in civilizational per capita metabolic rate is 11,000 watts. We use a lot of energy. That's about as much energy as a blue whale uses. And so we have, there are billions of us, and most of us aren't even really living in the kind of lifestyle of a developed country yet, but they will be very soon, and we hope they will be. We want them to. And so you're going to face a choice, and you won't face this choice, and I won't face this choice, but your grandchildren's grandchildren will face this choice. Do you want to live in a world of stasis, or do you want to have 1 trillion humans living in the solar system? Because the solar system is big. Earth is small. We capture Earth's surface is so small, it captures a tiny, tiny fraction of the solar output. So once you go out into space, you have, for practical purposes, once again, unlimited resources. And the solar system can easily support 1 trillion humans. If you had 1 trillion humans, then you'd have 1,000 Mozarts and 1,000 Einsteins and so on and so on. That would be a dynamic, incredible civilization in which you would want your grandchildren's grandchildren to live in. I think ultimately, Earth becomes zoned, residential and light industrial. And, we'll have universities here and beautiful parks and houses. And But we won't have big factories here. All of that will be much better done in space, where we have access to much higher quality resources. And so that's going to take several, that's a multi-100-year vision. And my piece of this vision is I'm taking my Amazon lottery winnings and I'm converting them into reusable rocket vehicles so that we can lower the cost of access to space. Because right now the price of admission to do interesting things in space is just too high. If I look at what Amazon was able to do 20 years ago, we didn't have to build a transportation network. It already existed. That heavy lifting was in place. We didn't have to build a payment system. That heavy lifting had already been done. It was the credit card system. We didn't have to put a computer at every desk. That had already been done too, mostly for playing games, by the way, and so on. So all the pieces of heavy lifting were already in place 20 years ago. And that's why, with $1 million, I could start this company. Today, and then there are even better examples on the internet over the last 20 years. Facebook started in a dorm room. I guarantee you 2 kids cannot build a giant space company in their dorm room. It's impossible. But I want to create the heavy lifting infrastructure, kind of do the hard part, so that the future generation, 2 kids in a dorm room, will be able to create a giant space company. So that's the goal. And then, thank you, you're not going to achieve the vision that I just laid out of 1 trillion humans living in space and having this dynamic world without a big industry made up of thousands of companies. But it has to start with making the vehicles much more productive. And right now, you use a rocket once and you throw it away, and that is just a very expensive way to do business.
So,
final clip. This is the stakes of history version of invention. Listen for the warning about stasis, because it's not about space. It's about what happens to you when you stop building, stop exploring, and settle for comfort.
Rockets. Super important to me. And if I believe on the longest time frame, and I really here I'm thinking of a time frame of a couple hundred years. So over many decades, I believe, and I get increasing conviction with this with every passing year, the Blue Origin, the space company, is the most important work I'm doing. And so there is a whole plan for Blue Origin.
So you'd say retail, online e-commerce, publishing, that's all less relevant than the space project.
And I'll tell you why. And so first of all, of course, I'm interested in space because I'm passionate about it and I've been studying it and thinking about it since I'm a 5-year-old boy. But that is not why I'm pursuing this work. I'm pursuing this work because I believe if we don't, we will eventually end up with a civilization of stasis, which I find very demoralizing. I don't want my great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren to live in a civilization of stasis. We all enjoy a dynamic civilization of growth and change, and let's think about what powers that. We are not really energy constrained. And so let me give you just a couple of numbers. If you take your body, your metabolic rate as a human, as just an animal, you eat food, that's your metabolism, you burn about 100 watts. Your power, your body is about 100, it's the same as a 100-watt light bulb. We're incredibly efficient. Your brain is about 60 watts of that. Amazing. And so, but if you extrapolate in developed countries where we use a lot of energy, on average in developed countries, our civilizational metabolic rate is 11,000 watts. So if in a natural state, where we're animals, we're only using 100 watts. In our actual developed world state, we're using 11,000 watts, and it's growing. For a century or more, it's been compounding at a few percent a year, our energy usage as a civilization. Now, if you take baseline energy usage globally, across the whole world, and compound it at just a few percent a year for just a few hundred years, you have to cover the entire surface of the Earth in solar cells. So that's the real energy crisis, and it's happening soon. And by soon, I mean within just a few hundred years. And so we don't actually have that much time. So what can you do? Well, you can have a life of stasis where you cap how much energy we get to use. You have to work only on efficiency. By the way, we've always been working on energy efficiency, and still we grow our energy usage. It's not like we have been squandering energy. We have been getting better at using it with every passing decade, and still we grow it. So stasis would be very bad, I think. Now, take the alternative scenario where you move out into the solar system. The solar system can easily support 1 trillion humans. And if we had 1 trillion humans, we would have 1,000 Einsteins and 1,000 Mozarts and unlimited, for all practical purposes, resources from solar power and so on. Why not? That's the world that I want my great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren to live in. And by the way, I believe that we will move all heavy, in that time frame, we will move all heavy industry off of Earth, and Earth will be zoned residential and light industry. And it will basically be a very beautiful planet.
Here's your challenge. Pick one idea you've been protecting because you don't want to be misunderstood and turn it into an experiment this week. Something small, testable, and real. Not a brainstorm, not a journal entry, a rep. If you want more breakdowns like this, how the best builders think, decide, and execute, subscribe and watch the next episode. And in the comments, tell me, what's the experiment you're running and what misunderstanding you're finally willing to tolerate?